this is my plan for today. And the reason I kind of want to signal that for this talk is you'll notice that it's folded into 4 pieces. And I said I'm going to talk for about 3/4 an hour. I may go over, so I might talk for about an hour. And so one very quick thing you can do when you're attending a talk is just think, okay, how long is this going to take? And will it have parts? And you can see the parts in this one, right? I've got it all kind of divided up. So there's 4 parts. One of them is going to be introductory, right? And then I'm going to talk about how to listen to feedback. So when you're getting feedback, criticism, input, when you're dealing with somebody commenting on your work or on your ideas. Then I will talk about how to listen to lectures like this one, right? And then I'm going to talk about how to listen in conversation. And I'm actually want to take that in 2 directions, how to listen in conversation and how to listen to conversations, right? Because sometimes we're listening to other people talk. We're not listening, we're not participating in the conversation. We're trying to follow somebody else's conversation, right? There's, of course, lots of other topics we could talk about, but some of them go off into areas of real sort of research methodology, like how to listen to an interview subject, right? When you're interviewing somebody, that would be a different kind of listening, and that has some methods to it, right? So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but a lot of the skills I'm going to be talking about here will transfer to that, all right? So remember this, right? That you can already sort of, if you're keeping notes or if you can already think, okay, about every 15 minutes or so, he should be moving on, right? Something new should be happening. And I should sort of be able to, in my notes, I should notice that. And I should notice that I'm learning about 3 different things: how to listen to feedback, how to listen to lectures, how to listen to and in conversations. Right? So I've already got those 3 kind of big areas carved out. That down for a second. If you've been here before, you know the picture that I'm just about to draw on the board, and you'll also see if I'm getting better at saying this quickly and efficiently. We're going to start with our favorite metaphor for, I like to use it for writing, but it's certainly a good metaphor for learning in general, is the iceberg of our knowledge. Remember that the dignity of the movement of this iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being above water. So it's everything that's under the surface that's really important here. We have knowledge under the surface, knowledge, right? But remember that I always emphasize that we don't just have knowledge as a possession. It's not just something we own. It's not something we acquire and then have and then are weighed down by, right? We're not carrying knowledge around. Knowledge is really a competence. What we are is we are knowledgeable, right? We are able to know things, and we are enabled by that knowledge to do things, right? Which means that when you're at university, when you're in school, we can ask sort of, do you have knowledge? Is there something under the surface? But is there a performance that you're capable of, right? Is there some, and then we can just grammatically turn that into a nice little gerund, right? So what is the activity of having knowledge? Well, it's knowing. Right? And what we really want to do when we're getting an education is we want to be good at sitting down or standing up or moving around in a knowing way, right? We want to be good at knowing. We want to be able to do that thing that we call knowing, right? That's what we want to be good at. And so my question has been, well, what is the performance that we're capable of when we're knowledgeable? What is the competence that we have? And I've been saying that sort of academically, there's 3 simple performances that you are capable of. You're better at thinking than people who are not knowledgeable about the things you're knowledgeable about, right? So in your program, within your field, you're a better thinker than most people, right? You're also a better talker, and you're a better writer, right? So we think, talk, and write more effectively, more productively, more joyfully, right? and we'll get to that in one of the talks as well, than most people. We're able to get more out of those performances. Right? We have skills there that, let's call them ignorant people, right? I'm ignorant about the subjects that you're knowledgeable about, right? I don't know as much, right? So you're experts, you're knowledgeable, you're developing knowledge in these fields, and so you're better at most people than at thinking, talking, and writing about those subjects. Okay? We've already had a talk about thinking. We've already had a talk about writing. We've had a talk about knowing, right? Today we're going to talk about listening, which of course is a competence that we have under the surface of our ability to talk. So somewhere deep down under our ability to talk, we have this capacity for listening. And it's part of our performance when we talk is that we're good at listening as well. Because we're actually good at doing the thing that we're expecting the audience of our talking, right, to be doing while we're talking. So there's a reciprocity there, right? So the skill of talking is connected to our empathy for the people we're sitting there listening like you are. Right? So keep that in mind, that way under the surface of your performance when you talk is your disposition to listen. Right? Likewise, way under the surface of your ability to think, we have your disposition to feel. You are capable. You are not just thinking creatures, right? You're feeling creatures. Robert Brandom says that we are reasonable beings. That's kind of what characterizes humans, that we have reasons. We are moved by the better reason. I like to add to that that we're also passionate, right? That we're also beings who are distinctly passionate about things, right? So we have this feeling. And of course, underneath our ability to write, we have an ability to read, and that's also been covered. We have had a talk on reading. Right? So there's been a talk on the art of reading as well. And that basically is the program, right? We're going to have a talk about talking coming up. We're going to have a talk about feeling. And I've been saying I didn't want to have a talk called How to Feel, because that seems a little, I don't know, feely, touchy-feely subject. So instead we have a talk called How to Enjoy Things. Right? So how to do things like think, talk, and write in a joyful way, in a way that feels good. And that's, so you sort of to appreciate the pleasure in things. And I come back to this theme again and again. I have a key into it today as well, because there is a particular feeling that we can really engage when we're listening, and that helps us to pay attention. So you can probably already guess what it is, but there is actually a kind of emotion to it that helps us get some pleasure out of the activity of listening. I'm not going to cover too much in here. I think that's where I always go wrong. I start talking about what's in here, right? But I think you'll remember that underneath our ability to think is the ability to form justified true beliefs, right? Underneath the ability to talk, if we're going to kind of unpack that, it's the ability to ask good questions, recognize good questions, right? But also ask them, engage with them, have a shared sense of humor with your knowledgeable peers, right? And understand the boundary to offense, right? So understand that there are certain rhetorical dangers in discourse, and understanding what it is and is not okay to say, and perhaps what it is and is not okay to say glibly, but might be okay to say with some seriousness if you approach the subject delicately, right? That boundary is an important one also to be aware of, right? And of course, writing is the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it. That is something that I'm now actually, we had talked about that. We talked about that last time, right? We did do how to write. Good. We've already done how to write. And that's actually important because I'm going to start with a reference back to that. That video is out there as well. But just remember that when you're trying to figure out, am I a knowledgeable person, you can ask yourself, can I think, talk, and write about the stuff I'm learning? Right? And if you want to be more specific, can I form, justify true beliefs about it? Can I have intelligent conversations with other knowledgeable people, right? With good humor and a good tone, some decorum. And can I compose coherent prose paragraphs about half a page at a time, right? That support, elaborate, or defend the ideas that I've learned. That's also a good test. Right? And so today we're going to get down into this lower layer and talk about how to listen. When I unfolded this piece of paper, what I was trying to demonstrate is that there's a kind of preparation you can do. And of course, for these talks, because they are pitched as informal talks, it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen. But when you go to classes and so forth, or if you set up a feedback exercise, you can know more specifically what to expect. So when I unfolded the piece of paper and said there are 4 parts to this, right, that gave you something more structured to expect. One of the things I would encourage you to do, even when you attend informal talks like this one, is reading the description, whatever made you sign up for it. Right? So whatever it is that got you in the room, ask yourself, what am I here to learn? So what are some questions that I have, right? And that's where we get to this feeling component, because what are you curious about? Right? What curiosity gets you into the room? And then you could say, well, when I'm attending classes, the schedule gets me into the room. Maybe I'm not specifically curious, but just try to be curious. Right? Try to figure out, what is it today that I'm going to class to learn about? What part of it am I actually curious about? So you can bring your curiosity into the room. Right? That's a really good way of starting to just to get a sense of, it's going to feel like something. Maybe it's going to feel terribly disappointing, right? Because I'm not going to get my curiosity satisfied. But I'm going to open myself up to that emotion, and I'm going to open myself up to actually feeling something about the situation, right? By being clear about, why am I here? What am I curious about? What are my questions? So keep that in mind. That's one set of sort of preparations you want to do: questions and curiosity. Right? The other set you want to get into is, what do I expect is going to be said? Right? That's not quite curiosity. It's not like, where are my gaps and what am I hoping to get out of this? Right? It's what do I think I already know about the subject? So Thomas is going to talk about how to listen. Right? I've already listened a great deal in life. I've known some wise people who've told me how to listen. Right? Maybe my parents or teachers, right, have given me some advice about paying attention and this sort of thing as I went along. So I have some ideas about what good listening is all about. Right? I have some knowledge and experience. So what am I expecting him to say if what he's going to say is true? Right? What am I expecting him to say in that way? Maybe I have that meta level, and so I'm expecting him to propound some myths about listening that I've heard all my life and I don't think are true. Right? But I'm expecting to hear those same tired old truths, right, that people say when they talk about listening. So that's the second thing. What are my expectations? What am I expecting to hear? What would not surprise me if he said? What would merely confirm my knowledge? And then there's an important thing, and maybe this is an emotional competence as well. How patient am I going to have to be? Right? As I'm preparing for this, I'm going to prepare my patience. And of course, you have different experiences with teachers and fellow students when they talk to you. Sometimes we go to meet a friend and we know we're going to have to listen. And we know we're going to have to be patient because that's the kind of friend they are, right? And certainly sometimes we go to a class and we know with the teacher, we've been to class with the teacher before, and we know we're going to need to be patient with certain things, right? So we can kind of adjust our patience going in. And that connects to, so just as questions connect to our curiosity, expectations connect to our knowledge, our patience should connect to our planning. right? So you guys showed up. I started almost on time. Some of you expect the introduction to go a little bit long, this kind of thing, because you've been here before. And then we're going to get on to it. Right? And when are you planning to get out of here? When are you planning to leave? Are you planning to leave during the break? Right? Because you know that the break is coming in about 45 minutes. And so you're going to leave for that, and then you can get on, you can go home for dinner or whatever it is you're going to do, or you're planning to stay for the Q&A. Right? You're a free human being, so you're allowed to make plans. But whatever plan you make is going to help you be patient, right? Because if you know when you're getting out of here, if you've decided with yourself when you're going to get out of here, then you're going to be able to be patient for the time that you've planned and set out for yourself, right? If you know you're going to rush off, it's going to feel like that's going to feel a certain way right now, right? If you know you're going to stay until exactly some time and then leave just calmly and casually, then that's going to feel the way that's going to feel, right? We'll get into that already in the first section, that knowing when it stops is an important part of listening, right? That is a really important part of it. Having some sense of that you're in control of that. So keep that in mind, that preparation is an important part of this. Being a good listener is all about being prepared, setting yourself up in certain ways to get things out of an auditory, oral, sometimes visual experience, right? So you're going to put yourself in a situation, you're going to experience it for a while, you're going to try to get something out of it. You want to go into it prepared with questions, expectations, and patience, right? Good. Let's move on to the first thing, which connects directly to not last week's, but 2 weeks ago's talk, the how to write. Listening to feedback. Classic case of listening is when somebody's telling you what they think of your work. Right? Now, you may have experienced this just because you've had a job and you've done something in the job, and then somebody's had to explain to you what they think of the quality of the work you've done. Right? So even that kind of listening situation where you're just going to hear maybe just like 2 or 3 minutes of feedback, right? This is how I feel or what I think of what you've done, right? That's an important, it's about you. So there, right there, you've got something to prepare for, right? You've got to ask yourself, what are my questions for this, right? What am I curious about in getting this feedback, right? What do I expect to hear? How well do I think I did? And how patient do I have to be? How long is it going to last? So I'm going to suggest for you, and this is a formal exercise that you can do with a peer, so somebody in your classes, so in your cohorts. I would suggest you do it with somebody that has the same knowledge base that you do. So somebody who is at the same level of the same program that you're taking. Because that gets you more information than if you just choose a trusted friend or somebody that you like to talk to, right? Talk to somebody choose someone for this exercise that is in a position to give you disciplinary intellectual feedback, right? It makes it work better. And we're going to do something throughout this talk, which is simply to plan the time. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about something that takes at most 9 minutes, but it can take 1 minute. Like the first minute happens, something's going to happen in the first minute, right? So keep that in mind. We're going to think about something that is going to take 1 minute, then it's going to take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and so forth. And we're going to imagine a situation in which you have done what I've suggested as far as writing goes, which is to say, the day before you decided that here's something I know to be true. Sense making is a retrospective process, or the internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers, right? Things you know to be true, right? So you've picked something from your studies that you know is true. And then you try to forget it for the rest of the afternoon. So at the end of the day of learning, you decided this is true. You wrote that sentence down. You tried not to think about it. You relaxed for the rest of the day. Then you got up in the morning and you spent 27 minutes composing a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says this one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it. And we'll get back to why those are important things, decisions to make, because it's all about what are your questions for this feedback, right? If you've decided what you want to say and you've decided how you want to say it in writing, you're ready to hear some feedback, right? You're ready to receive feedback because you thought you did something very particular. You didn't just think you put some words on a page and you're wondering whether people like it, right? In fact, whether or not they like it is not as important to you as whether or not they understood it. Maybe you find out they understood it perfectly well, but they don't like it, right? But if they understood it perfectly well, good work, right? That is, the writing works, they just don't like you anymore because you said exactly what you think. Great, that can be good, right? So if you go into it with the right sets of questions, you can get the feedback you need. So keep that in mind. The more deliberate your writing session is, the better you're going to be at listening to the feedback. So the first thing that's going to happen in this first minute, and this is interestingly hard, you're going to ask your reader, you're going to take this partner, you're going to say, we're going to spend 9 minutes all together doing this, right? But the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take these 175 words that I've written, and you're going to read them out loud to me. Just going to read them right off the page. You've never seen them before, so you're just going to read this out loud. What does it sound like to you? Right? So this is just like what's going on in your head when you're reading somebody else's text, just silently, right? But you're going to now hear somebody else do it. So this is a classic act of listening. Right? You have written the script. You've given it to somebody else. You're going to listen to how it sounds when somebody who didn't write it reads it out loud. It's hard because it's your words. It'd be much easier if it was somebody else's words, right? If somebody else has written those words and they were just reading them out loud to you, you would just have to try to be interested and engaged, right? Now you have to be interested and engaged in how it's read out loud, and you have to recognize that this is somebody reading your words. This is what you sound like in somebody else's head. Right? It's going to take about a minute. Right? If you've written a paragraph, you've written no more than 200 words, so you're keeping the reading experience to about a minute, and you can prepare yourself for that. You're going to have to listen to yourself in somebody else's tone of voice for a minute, right? Get ready for it. Put on a poker face because you don't want to give the reader any feedback about how it's going. You want the reader just to be working with the words on the page. So just sit passively, and that also helps you to concentrate and to listen because you're not figuring out how to help, right? You're just listening. Then there's a temptation, of course, as soon as they've read it out loud, for you to comment and say, oh yeah, it sounded like you didn't quite understand this part, or yeah, I realized it was kind of clunky and that sentence was kind of long. You're making apologies for the text, right? You're really, right? You're jumping in, you're participating, you're engaging. You're not listening. And what you're doing is you're thinking about all the things that you already think you should fix in this text, and you want to tell the reader that you know. It's only taken a minute and you already know, right, what you're going to do different. Just relax, keep listening, and ask the reader, and the reader will know this in advance because you'll have set this exercise up. Ask the reader, what's the key sentence? Which is to say, of these 6 or 7, 8 or 9 or 10 sentences that I've written here, which one of them says the one thing that this paragraph says? Remember, you're not asking the reader to summarize, to formulate a thesis statement for you. You're saying, I put one in there. One of these sentences is the key sentence. Right? I deliberately wrote one of these sentences as the key sentence. I even wrote it the day before. Tell me which one you think it is. Right? I'm going to just listen. You read it out loud and then tell me what you think the key sentence is. Is it the first sentence? Is it the last sentence? Is it in the middle? Second to last, second sentence? It could be any of those sentences, right? We've only spent 2 or 3 minutes together, you and the reader, right? And all that's happened is your paragraph has been read out loud, you heard that, and now they say, I think The key sentence is the second sentence. I think that's really where you say the one thing that this paragraph says. Okay, what do you think the paragraph is doing with that, right? And this is what I call posture. Just want to make sure I get this right. Yes. And the posture can be support, elaborate, or defend. Right? So in what rhetorical posture has this paragraph been written? I'm saying this thing, and it's the second sentence, right? This is the claim I'm making, and I'm trying to support it with evidence, or I'm trying to elaborate by providing definitions or telling a story, or I'm trying to help you to understand, right? Or I'm defending it, right? I'm writing it in a defensive way. And what that really means is, so the reader is saying something objective about how the paragraph appears to the reader, saying the posture of this paragraph seems to be supportive, elaborating, or defensive, defending, right? That's how it seems to be written. What the reader is also saying, and if you're listening carefully, when the reader is saying this, you're already noticing that this is what's going on. They may then say it explicitly. You're going to say, what's the difficulty, right? Is the key sentence taken on its own hard to believe, hard to agree with, or hard to understand? And I just did that wrong for reasons I cannot explain. Hard to understand or hard to agree with, right? So you're going to have a paragraph. It's going to have a posture, and it's going to be difficult to, and the posture is going to relate to a difficulty. The difficulty will be, this is hard to believe, it's hard to understand, or it's hard to agree with. So either the reader's saying, if I'd only gotten the key sentence, I would need evidence before I believe it. I would need help to believe it. Or if I'd only gotten the key sentence, I would need you to explain exactly what you mean. Or if I'd only gotten the key sentence, I would need you to defend yourself because I don't agree with you, right? If you just said that to me, I'd just say, well, I disagree, right? So I need more words to help me agree, or to help me understand, or to help me believe. If you've done it perfectly right, the reader is also saying, and now I do believe you, right? And now I do understand you. Or at least I think I understand you. Maybe even now I do agree with you, although that's very rare. What they'll usually say is, still don't agree with you, but I see where you're coming from now. Right? I understand the reasonable of your position. I see it's defensible, right? Even though it's not something I now agree with. So let's just walk through it because we've probably only used about 3 minutes or 4 minutes of this feedback exercise by now, right? We've read the paragraph out loud. That may have taken 1 or 2 minutes, probably around a minute. The reader may have taken a little bit of time to think about what the key sentence is and deciding, right? The readers then thought, and given especially in the context of the paragraph, probably I think you're trying to support this. You're trying to help me believe it, right? So maybe 3 or 4 minutes have passed. Already in those 3 or 4 minutes, you've been practicing listening and not talking, listening and not engaging, listening and not helping, because all you're doing is sitting there passively. You're not even smiling or nodding. You're not even saying, yeah, you got the key sentence right. Right? You're trying to make it everything be the reader's doing the work, and you're listening to what it's like to read your text. What is it about this text? What does it make happen in the mind of my reader? Right? So keep that in mind. The first 3 minutes are really practicing the discipline of just sitting there listening. Now, you can actually do this exercise and stop there. So you can say, we're going to just do this for 3 minutes because I'm not very good. I'm not a very good listener yet. So I'm not going to overdo it on the first day, right? We're just going to do 3 minutes. All I want you to do is read me out loud, tell me what my key sentence is, and tell me what my posture is and what you think is difficult. Spend 3 minutes doing that, we stop. Right? If you want, you can then say, and then we'll reverse it, I'll do one of your paragraphs, right? But then stop and get on with your days. Do something else. Don't sit there and talk about your paragraphs for the rest of the morning, right? That's all you're doing. That's what you decided to do. But as you get better and better at this, you can say, all right, next time we'll do 6 minutes. So next time we'll give ourselves a little more time. We'll be a little more relaxed about it. We'll still read it out loud. We'll still do the key sentence. We'll still do the posture and the difficulty. But then afterwards, I want to know what's going on. So I as the writer, want to know what's going on in your mind as the reader now. Right? So, okay, did I help you believe? Do you believe it more now? Is it easier to believe? What questions do you have? What are you thinking? What other beliefs does this associate with for you, right? What's going on? What did I stimulate? What did I start in your mind? Right? Maybe even what are you expecting the next paragraph to say? Where do we go from here, right? So now you're listening to the reader. Just imagine what this paragraph is supposed to be doing, what context it might work in, and you're going to give the reader another 2 or 3 minutes to do that the first time you do this. Then it gets interesting. So next time, when you're really good at that, spending those 6 minutes, you're getting a lot of information out of those 6 minutes. You're then going to open it up to not just what's going on in your mind, but let the reader also say some things about how is this paragraph working as a piece of literature. We're going to listen to a criticism of the work. Notice that until this time, you haven't really received any judgment of your thoughts or of your writing because it's just been the experience of being read that you've listened to, right? You haven't really been judged. But now you're going to open yourself up to this. What do you think? Right? What do you think of the sentences? What do you think of the rhythm? What do you think of the choice of words? What do you think of the imagery? Right? What do you think of this as writing? And I say do that at the end and even set a time for when that part of the feedback begins, because you want to be able to listen to it, which means you want to know when it ends. Right? So you want to know that when the timer goes at 9 minutes, we stop. Right? Whatever you've said, right, try to be nice, right? So you want to ask your reader to be nice, but also be honest, right? And I'm here and I'm listening to this now, right? I'm listening to it, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it later. So don't worry about what you're saying. And then it'll stop 9 minutes in. We'll take a 1 minute break. I usually just suggest after those 9 minutes, you just sit in silence, right? Grateful silence, because you've received the gift of feedback, right? So you're just happy, right? And then go each to your own. And remember that the reader didn't really do anything other than just be themselves, right? All they were doing is being themselves for 9 minutes with your little script, right? Does that make sense? Simple exercise in listening. Gets progressively harder, and those last 3 minutes, last maybe 1 or 2 minutes, can be really hard when you're actually receiving criticism. So make sure you're ready for that. Make sure you also trust the relationship enough for that, right? But practice getting to the point where you can listen to criticism of your writing for 2 minutes. Right? And then let it stop. That's just really important, right? Just stop. Which is a theme for pretty much everything that we do, right? You'll become a better writer. You'll find writing more enjoyable if you know when it's going to stop, right? You become a better listener if you know when it's going to stop as well. Right? And a lot of that just has to do with imposing some order on the situation. All right, I think this is going okay. It's not going great time-wise, but right. What about listening to lectures? When we talk about lectures, of course, we are talking about slightly different time scales, because we're not just two people sitting in a room who've decided to use 9 minutes together with a 1 minute break. We're usually going to be people like this, 50, probably what, 20 or 30 people here. There's going to be 50 or 100, sometimes 200 people in a lecture. right? And one person standing in the beginning or at the front of the room. And we're going to talk different time scales. So it'll be like 5, 10, 15. What else did I? Yeah, 30. I'll just scale it like that. 30, 45. Take a break. And then maybe, maybe we got to talk about 90 minutes, right? So you're going to have two lectures in a row. I know sometimes you have 3 lectures in a row, but we'll just say we'll scale up from there on your own, right? So again, what you want to do is prepare yourself. What kind of patience do I need, right? What kind of questions do I have? What sorts of knowledge am I expecting to hear? And then we can sort of ask ourselves, what are we going to do in the first 5 minutes? What do we want to have in place 10 minutes in, and so forth? Remember, a lot of this you're prepared for going in. So if you're attending a lecture in a class, as part of a class, or as part of a separate lecture series or just an event, you can always read the plan, right, the syllabus for that particular event, and have some idea about what you're showing up for, and you can begin to map out the space that you're going to use to absorb the learning in your notes. But by about 5 minutes into the lecture, and I hope I satisfied you on this point, right? You should be able to answer the question: is there a structure? Right? Is there a structure to this particular lecture? Right? What am I prepared for? The thing that I prepared myself for, am I going to get what I expected? How am I imagining this is going to pass? Right? Some lecturers will start off by saying, I have 20 slides to show you. You can kind of keep track of how many slides you're going to get through. Sometimes they'll put the slides out in advance, right? Some people call these nice lectures. Some people say this is not very good pedagogy, but we won't discuss that. But they'll put the slides out, and then well, we're going to get through these slides, right? So you've got some mapping there. But this is a question that 5 minutes into the lecture, you should really be asking yourself, is there a structure to this? And am I following the structure properly? And then I would say, once this falls into place and you're really trying to say, okay, I now think I know what's going to happen for the next 45 minutes, 40 or 45 minutes or so. And this is a good question to ask. Am I the right audience? Now, ideally, of course, you are the right audience for the class, for the class that you've signed up for, right? So ideally, when it's part of your classes, you are the right person in the right room at the right time. But often, if you go to a public lecture, you will very quickly get a sense from the lecturer themselves, from the invited speaker, that they have decided that you're an audience of this kind of person, and you now know you're actually not the one that they're talking to, right? They're making assumptions about you as an audience, and you're not that person. It can happen in class. In fact, it can happen the same situation, but it can go both ways. You realize that this is the class where if I haven't read the chapter that we were supposed to read for this class, I will get nothing out of it, because the teacher is assuming that we have all read this and is talking to us as though we have read it. And if we haven't read it, we're not going to be on the same page, as it were, right? So you can immediately decide, okay, I'm not the ideal audience for this particular talk because I haven't read. But sometimes the lecturer will step into the room and say, so how many people have read the text for today? And then 2 hands go up. And then the lecturer goes, oh, all right, I'll tell you what it says in the text then. And then okay, well, now we've got half an hour that isn't for me because I read the text, right? So remember that can go both ways. That you just have to recognize, okay, wait a minute. I prepared myself in one way, but the lecturer has now announced, the speaker has announced that I'm not the ideal audience now. Right? So now what I'm going to do. So keep in mind that that's a good question. It's a good question, even if the answer is no. And then ask yourself who would be, right? And can I be them? So about 10 minutes into the lecture, you're asking yourself, am I the right audience? Ideally, you say, yes, I am. I'm exactly the kind of person that this talk is directed at. Then I say, but I might say no, right? So if I say no, then I say, okay, what is the ideal audience for this particular talk, right? And then I ask myself, can I put myself in their position? Why do I want to be able to do that? Why not just say, all right, next half hour is not going to be good for me. I'm going to open my emails and I'll start doing something else. Right? Well, because there is something to get out of this, but it's something you can get out of it from a particular perspective. And now you just have to put yourself in that perspective. You have to say, well, I can imagine who the right audience would be. And I can ask myself, could I put myself in their shoes? Could I be them? Could I try to listen from that perspective? Maybe I'll get something out of the talk then, but certainly I'll get the opportunity to empathize with other people that are in that position, right? That might help me later when I'm talking to the people who attended the talk. It might help me later when I'm listening to people ask questions from this talk, right? Because those questions are coming from the position of the ideal audience for the speaker, right? So I might be able to use the experience of putting myself in another person's shoes, listening from that vantage point, getting something out of it, right? So we're about 10 minutes into the talk. We've decided something about, we've formed an image of the structure, we've formed an image about who we ought to be, right? Who the ideal audience is, right? Now, so 15 minutes is a long time, and it's already been a long time. We've gone at this 45 minutes already, right? So 15 minutes is a long time. And so what can happen is you can think, am I getting bored? Am I entertained? Right? How boring or amusing a lecture is this? Right? That's a good question to ask, not just because all lectures should be entertaining. Certainly they shouldn't be. There's lots of topics that can only be presented well in a boring way, right? That the ideal lecture is actually not particularly entertaining. So in both cases, if I'm bored, that is a certain barrier to listening. It's going to make me listen in a particular way. And if I become aware of the fact that I'm getting bored, maybe I can check some of the biases that come out of being bored, right? The filters that boredom sets on my experience, right? I can become aware of them. So about 15 minutes in, just check yourself. How am I feeling? Am I bored or entertained? If I'm terribly entertained, right? Let's say that I go to a lecture and it's super entertaining, and already 15 minutes in, I can see this is really good time. I'm really enjoying this, right? Okay, great. But what are you missing? Because it's a little bit too fun. Are you writing notes, right? Or are you just leaning back now and letting yourself be entertained, right? Keep in mind that boredom sounds like the bad thing and entertainment sounds like the good thing. But both are actually moods that you're in that can affect what you get out of a lecture. So about 15 minutes in, check yourself. How do I feel? How am I experiencing this? And how is that affecting my intake of information? About 30 minutes in, I would now say, now you know enough about what's being said that you're probably forming an opinion of your own. Like you're reacting to this in an intellectual way, which means you can ask yourself, do I agree or disagree? Right? How am I now disposed to the ideas that the speaker is presenting? Right? Is this something that is offending me? Is this something that is just not sitting well with me intellectually, something I think is untrue, right? And Again, we could imagine that agreement is the good thing and disagreement is the bad thing. But in both cases, if you find yourself, oh, I'm in super agreement with everything that this person is saying, just remember, maybe you're also being a little bit uncritical now, right? Maybe you're getting seduced by this, right? If I disagree, of course, that could be a bad thing in the sense that now I'm resistant to the message that they're coming with, but it could be a good thing because it gives you a basis for skepticism and criticism and so forth. Maybe you're understanding it much more precisely because it's constantly running into your opposing opinions. Okay? So these are not value judgments. They're just things to be aware of, things to be mindful of as you're listening. And about 30 minutes into the lecture, ask yourself, have we run into these things that I'm agreeing with or disagreeing with? Okay? And then as we get to the end of the first 45 minutes, begin to take a note of the questions that have come up, right, in your mind. Right now, you're really saying, what questions do you have? Now, of course, I'm assuming a pretty classic monological lecture here, right, where you're saving your questions for the end. But this is also a really good exercise in listening, actually, because, and I said this at the beginning as well, if you have some pressing question, feel free to ask, right? And most teachers will say that. Most speakers actually will say, I've got something prepared, but I'm open to being interrupted. Just remember that if you are spending all of the 45 minutes in a state of, I could ask a question, right? Formulating possible questions, that might also be affecting your listening, right? So you're not just taking in. If you go through these kinds of moods, these kinds of reflections, and then at the end, begin to summarize and formulate questions, and start to think about asking them as you get near the end, and maybe the listening has, you've had a better space of listening. None of these things are just rules. These are just things to be aware of, right? Because in some classes, especially, constantly formulating questions is part of the interaction that is sought. So definitely don't forget that. What about technology? Many of you will go to classes, you'll have your laptops and so forth. I'm going to illustrate this with a piece of paper, and it works perfectly well in this low-tech format, but you can also do it, of course, in a high-tech format if you wish. The simple technique that I'm going to suggest to you is just to fold a piece of paper in half. And now you have a nice set of notes, right? Now, when you were going through this and you got through is there a structure, you might even be able to put some lines on here, right? And a little bit based on your expectations and so forth. See, are you leading? Yeah. Because it's 45 minutes. It's an hour. Yeah, no, it's fine. See. What you can do is just put some lines on there, right? And mark out that structure as well. But notice you've also got a left side and a right side. Left side and the right side, right? That gives you two different columns to think in. And the way you do this is you say on the left-hand side of your page, you put everything that the speaker actually said. So you write down the facts, the phrases, maybe the quotes, the details, maybe some of the references. Write down things that the speaker actually said. And on the right-hand side, you keep track of your reactions to that, your opinions, and your questions. So as you're going through this entire 45-minute section, right, you've got some sort of two-column system, one of what's actually being said, and one of them what's going on in your mind as you listen. Right? Nice little record of that. Of course, it's a really good idea then after the lecture or the talk to go home and to transcribe it in an orderly form while it's still fresh, because then you have an extra record. If you're already doing it on a computer, then you don't get that extra step of transcribing your notes right? Because you think, oh, it's already in there in the computer. Right? So little exercise that you can think about there. Usually a good lecturer, I have not been a great lecturer, will give you a break at 45 minutes, which lets you reset, and then you can start over, right? So the next 45 minutes will kind of repeat that. Okay, I'll say a quick 5 minutes. Yeah, I'll say 5 minutes about listening and conversation, then we can take up any questions that you have in the question session. All of these skills, so especially this and this, which are formal exercises you can train, and you have plenty of opportunity to do it because you're doing a lot of writing. So you can train yourself to listen to feedback. You're doing a lot of attending a lot of classes and so forth. So you can set yourself up for this. Every time you go to a 45-minute lecture, you can say, let's practice listening in this way. You're, of course, free to invent different exercises to do for 9 minutes when you're practicing listening to feedback. And of course, you're free to invent different questions that seem more relevant in the context that you are in. I'm just suggesting is have kind of a plan of what are you checking in with yourself about every 5, 10, 15, 30, and 45 minutes, right? What's going on in your, do you have some kind of plan for that? And then you take that skill, that discipline, and then you start practicing having conversations. Remember that a really good conversation is one that you know not just what it's about and who's participating, but when it starts and when it ends. So get a group of students together, sometimes just pairs, but even just a small group. Decide when the meeting starts and decide when the meeting ends and decide what the meeting is about. Sometimes even have an agenda. That can be a good thing to do. And then start it and stop it on time, right? Because again, as soon as you start going over time, or if people don't even know when it's going to end, it becomes very hard to listen, very hard to participate in the conversation, right? It's much easier to listen if you know this is going to last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. If you know how long the meeting is going to take, it's much, much easier to listen. Understand that in a conversation, the ideas are forming kind of in real time in front of your eyes, which means, or in front of your ears, I guess, which means that you are constantly making guesses and hypotheses about what people mean, and you have to let them change. Your guesses have to sometimes be right, sometimes be wrong. You have to let the people you're talking to change their mind as the conversation progresses. Right? Otherwise, you're not really listening if you're not listening to them change their minds. And sometimes you have to it's just your understanding of what they're saying that's changing. Right? So they meant the right thing the first time. You just misunderstood it. And sometimes it's a little game we play. Sometimes you just have to let people say, yeah, that's what I meant all along, even though they said it completely differently at the beginning of the conversation, right? Sometimes you have to let that go, as long as you end in a place where you understand. Right? So remember, just there is that gradual kind of development of thought in a conversation. And then as you are, because I want to keep the time here. So as you are going, as you're listening to a conversation, remember when you get to the end of it, to just ask yourself, what did this satisfy? Walt Whitman has a great expression. He says, whatever satisfies the soul is truth. So listen for that. Listen for the thing that was satisfied. And then remember that what is satisfied in conversation, in lectures, and in getting feedback is your curiosity. Right? So it's whatever curiosity you brought into the conversation that then gets gradually satisfied, partially satisfied, and just reflect at the end of it, in what way am I satisfied, right? How did this actually satisfy my curiosity? Because that's what you were listening for, and that's what you got out of it.